Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll be getting started in a few minutes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. We are live on all platforms and we'll be starting in just a few more minutes. We're waiting for more folks to join. Thank you to everyone who's joining us tonight. We will be getting started in just a few more minutes. Welcome. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Thank you, everyone, for being here. All right, hello everyone. Welcome, comrades and friends, to Workers' World Party's weekly broadcast where hundreds of revolutionaries from across the world gather to strategize, to analyze, and to build the struggle for a socialist future and a workers' world. Tonight, we have an exciting panel of revolutionaries and anti-war activists from across the country. I'm one of the hosts of tonight's programs. My name is Romeo. I use they, them, and ze, here pronouns, and I am a candidate comrade of Workers' World from the Bay Area in California. Joining me tonight as co-host is Makazi from the NYC branch of Workers' World Party. Take it away, Makazi.
Yeah, hi everyone. If you could take a second and go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Workers World Party, and share this video with your friends and in your Facebook groups and pages, that would help us enormously to reach more members of our class. Also, please share your comments at the at Workers World on Twitter. We're live on YouTube. We're live on Twitch, twitch.tv/Workers World. And please make sure to share the live stream video on Facebook, Twitter, or wherever you can post it on social media. Now, with that said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker tonight. Monica Moorhead is a Workers' World managing editor, the editor of Marxism, Reparations, and the Black Freedom Struggle, and the co-coordinator of International Working Women's Coalition, New York City. Monica, if you could, can you tell us who Lucy Parsons is and what her contribution to, what is her connection to May Day?
Okay. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I'm so happy to be part of this very important discussion. Yeah, I have the honor of speaking about the great Lucy Parsons. She is one of the inspirations, for our International Working Women's Day Coalition. So I just wanted to do a short slideshow presentation on her and why, to show why she is still an inspiration, to many revolutionaries and socialists around the world. And very little is known about her inside the United States, and that's no coincidence. So Lucy Parsons was born into slavery in 1851 in Virginia. Her original name was Lucia, and her mother and others escaped from the plantation in Virginia and moved to Texas. Now, even though her future spouse, Albert Parsons, fought for the Confederacy, he eventually helped to register former enslaved Black people to vote during Reconstruction. Now, the two of them met, and once they decided that they wanted to be together, they fled from Texas due to the miscegenation laws, which forbid mixed marriages up until 1967 in this country. They eventually moved to Chicago, and they had a son and daughter. Now, they both became union organizers with anarchist ideas in Chicago, where this is a picture of the Great Strike of 1877, which helped to ignite the struggle for the 8-hour day, like many other strikes that were happening around the country around the same time. And this is really to counter the horrific working conditions, in the factories especially, and throughout the industrial, part of the country with this 10 to 16-hour work days. And this is a picture of one of the original graphics demanding an 8-hour day. As you can see, it says 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, and really 8 hours for what we will, which really means 8 hours for leisure for the workers. Now, on May 1st, 1886, hundreds of thousands of US industrial workers participated in a nationwide strike to demand an 8-hour day. And this is a depiction of the Haymarket Ride of 1886. This happened on May 4th, 1886, when the police threw a bomb into Haymarket Square in Chicago. This was after a peaceful workers' rally took place where Albert Parsons spoke, and they killed some of the workers, and they arrested 8 more workers, including Albert Parsons. And these arrestees, who were falsely framed for murdering a police officer, they became known as the Haymarket Martyrs. 6 of them were executed, including Albert Parsons, in 1887. It was 3 years later that May Day was officially declared as International Workers' Day. Now, the loss of her spouse did not keep Lucy from organizing for economic rights and on political issues like Sacco and Vanzetti, who were Italian immigrants. They were immigrants and anarchists and union organizers from Italy. And they were victims of anti-immigrant xenophobia by the bosses and capitalist politicians, like so many other Italian workers during that time. Italian workers were really a big target in terms of anti-immigrant policies in the United States. And of course, we know that has carried over today with the racist xenophobia that is shown towards migrants from Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa. And there were many demonstrations like this one that supported when Sacco and Vanzetti were sentenced to die in the electric chair. Many workers around the country came to their support and to their defense, like this one, where it says, "Come in your thousands." Now, Lucy was also a staunch supporter for the freedom of the Scottsboro brothers. These were 9 young Black men who were accused of raping 2 white women in Alabama. The 9 were exonerated when the 2 women admitted that they were coerced into lying under oath by officials, racist officials in Alabama. Now, Lucy and Mother Jones were the only 2 women, and this is Mother Jones, who was a founding member. She and Lucy were founding members of the Industrial Workers of the World. And Mother Jones was known as a organizer of coal miners, especially in West Virginia. They were the only 2 women to speak at the founding conference of the IWW in 1900 or 1905. And this is a picture. The next picture is a picture of members of the IWW and their families. And as you can see, they were holding up papers that said solidarity. Also, the workers are one big union. So it's a pretty extraordinary photo at the time. Okay. And this is, Lucy was, her home, her apartment was a organizing center for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, which was founded on June 3rd, 1900. And these women would come and hold organizing meetings or union meetings in Lucy's home in Chicago. Now, this is a wonderful quote from Lucy. As I said, she was an anarchist. She also considered herself a revolutionary socialist. And she really hated the bosses and the politicians. And this is one of her most famous quotes: "Never be deceived that the rich will allow you to vote their wealth away." And that slogan is still true today, every 4 years when we have these, capitalist elections. Now, this is Lucy Parsons in her old age. And she was known as a great orator. She would get on soapboxes and talk to the workers, about, their rights and, politics. And this is one of the lectures that she did in Chicago. And she lived to be 91 years old. And she was killed in a very mysterious fire in her Chicago home. And many people believe that the police actually started the fire because they hated Lucy Parsons. As you can see here, this is a very famous quote by the Chicago police on Lucy Parsons, where they said that she was more dangerous than 1,000 rioters, which was quite a compliment, for Lucy. And this is one of our banners at the International Working Women's Day event on International Workers Women's Day in 2017. We always carry our Lucy Parkins banners at these demonstrations. And we know if Lucy Parsons was alive today, even at 91 years old, she would be in solidarity with May Day. And this year, this is a New York City May Day flyer, both in English and in Spanish. And we will be marching in the spirit of Lucy Parsons. And because we know that Lucy Parsons would be in solidarity with the Amazon workers who courageously tried to organize a union back in late March in Bessemer, Alabama. And we know that struggle is going to continue. It's not over. And we know eventually the Amazon workers will organize a union, and other workers around in other industries will also follow in their footsteps because they've been so inspired. We know that Lucy Parsons would be in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter struggle. This is a Makia Bryant, the young 16-year-old Black woman who was murdered by police in Columbus, Ohio. Also, this is, of course, George Floyd demonstration and Justice for Dante Wright, in solidarity for justice for Breonna Taylor, who was killed in Kentucky, in solidarity with the struggle to free Mumia and all political prisoners. And I'm ending with this quote from Lucy. We cannot help but believe that were every law, every title deed, every court, and every police officer or soldier abolished tomorrow with one sweep, we would be better off than we are now. And the last slide sort of shows young people in the streets demanding to abolish the New York Police Department. So anyway, this is my presentation, and I want to end by saying, Lucy Parsons Presente, long live International Workers' Day. Thank you.
Lucy Parsons Presente. Thank you very much, Monica. That was a really incredible story. I want to mention that Workers' World, our newspaper, has been in continuous circulation since 1959. During the first months of the COVID pandemic, the print edition was temporarily suspended, but we're happy to announce that we have resumed printing physical copies of Workers' World newspaper again on a monthly basis. You can subscribe to receive the paper and tear down the walls by email at workers.org. Each week we run our section Tear Down the Walls, which is about the struggle for the abolition of the prison industrial complex. The Prisoner Solidarity Committee has a long history of solidarity with imprisoned members of our class. From our inside report on the Attica Uprising in 1971 to our weekly coverage today, please support our prisoner subscription program at patreon.com/WWP. With that said, our next speaker is Mahoma Lopez, the co-executive director of the Laundry Workers Center in New York City. He's an immigrant worker from Mexico who has been living in this country for 22 years. He decided to organize because he was a victim of labor exploitation. Mahoma, I'd like to turn it over to you. What is the role of migrant workers in reviving May Day? And why is it so important for all workers to build solidarity with migrants?
Well, what can I say? Well, it's super, super important, especially because our communities always were oppressed by the system. But what is super important, but also is super hard because we need to create a lot of political conscience. We need to explain to the workers, to our community, why it's super important they be part of the May 1st. In this pandemic, we hear all the time, we are essentials. Immigrant workers move this city. And the workers recognize how important they are, but sometimes they, like example, I had to learn how to build my political consciousness. When I arrived to this country, I don't have any idea about labor movement. I don't have idea.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you switch on your camera for us?
My camera is off?
Yeah. There you go. I can see you now.
Oh, because I'm checking my notes, probably my.
Thanks
so
a lot.
yeah, basically, when I write this country, I don't have any idea about labor movement or which ones are my basic rights. I had to learn because I was oppressed and in a very extreme way. So that's the only way when I say, well, I had to do something because this situation is not good. And that's happened when you are an immigrant, you are right to this country, and we have so many fears. We have a lot of things pass by your mind, which the only thing you have in your mind is work, and try to survive. But I have the great fortune to get involved in the labor movement, learn and build my political consciousness. And right now, that's why as a labor organizer, that's what we do, transmit that information, transmit our experience as immigrants, because right now, the workers recognize our comrades, our friends, family members. We recognize we are essential workers. We recognize we are important, but sometimes we don't recognize we have a lot of political power. So, and this is like, we need to build that consciousness, because if we really want to revive May 1st, the people, the workers, the working class has to understand how much power we have. That's a very hard, it's so difficult because it's not easily just to try to convince everybody or all the workers to be part of the May 1st, or just basically get involved in the community, because we know, like, every time we try to do that, we had to handling with the oppressed system. Like, you try to organize in your job or you try to form a union, what happened? You get fired, you got scared. The companies has a lot of a lot of economic power used basically to dismiss the power of the workers. We have the police brutality. So it's not easily like to the people that start getting involved. We need to do a really, really hard job in order to our comrades start, or the working class start participating in these actions. But yeah, it's crucial, because other things, or what I hear, because I have so many meetings during this pandemic with workers. Basically, the workers are expecting the system or the government, they do something for them. Oh, but it's the obligation of the government to provide us food, or provide us this and ABC. And we say, well, you have this expectation, but the reality is no. You're not gonna receive anything, and we saw that like a lot of immigrant workers, they don't receive the stimulus check. Why? Because the immigration status. And the workers they saw in critical moments like this pandemic, landlords are kicking out on the apartments because they cannot pay the rent. A lot of people, they don't even have food in the fridge to survive. And nobody supports these workers. The system don't support, and is basically use this experience to explain the workers, look, the only way you can have something or you have a political power is if you organize, or if we came together and we demand what we deserve. And one of the good samples is like right now in New York, we won $2.1 billion for immigrant workers for they don't receive any stimulus, which is great because the mobilizations, the people start mobilizing because they have this specific issue. But the problem is when the things start getting better, the people sit again. And we need to maintain our activity all the time because sometimes the system oppresses us a little bit and basically we don't react. We react when we are super, super oppressed. But when we solve that situation, we forgot, like always, the system, they try to take us our rights. And yeah, we have this duty to speak with the people and build this political consciousness if we really want to revive the May 1st day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mahoma. Next, we are going to hear from Ed Childs, who is no stranger to the kind of vicious union-busting tactics we saw practiced this year in Bessemer, Alabama. Ed is on the interim central committee of Workers' World Party and has been an organizer and chief steward for Unite Here and SEIU. Ed, what are some best practices for winning an organizing drive?
Thank you, Emily. It's and thank everybody out there for coming on this thing. I want to raise what our brother just talked about, and that's raising consciousness. We on organizing workers, you've got to understand who our enemy is. And obviously the campaign that we were just talking about, Amazon, Jeff Bezos and the whole management team, but the slew of Congress and other Wall Street people who are all conjured up with them. Why are they so against a union? One, that on the average, workers make 11% on wages alone if they're unionized, and they get at least 5% more for benefits. So most of the time, actually a lot more than that. So you can see when Wall Street goes after 1 or 2% increases, they go nuts. But what about 15 or more percent that a union they feel is taking away from their rightful profits as capitalists? This is wealth that we made. So we see that Amazon, what did they do to undercut this union drive? One, they did nothing spectacular. It's what most employers do in this country. They hire outside firms who are professional union busters. They set up a spy system. They spent millions and millions of dollars on people going in just to spy. Anybody that was associated with somebody else, you had a group of 3 or more people, you immediately were brought into the office. And if you did it a few times, you were eased out the door. You had one-on-one with managers who were telling you why they were against unions. You had one-on-one with anti-union co-workers. The co-workers were hired to intimidate workers. And if the co-worker comes to you and gives you a big anti-union spiel, what you realize right off the bat is they're spies. And it's real intimidating. Then you also had group hostile meetings. But other than that, they also had the Congress. They have the Constitution. They have the laws. They have the police. I just seen a report that the Boston Police Department, they're going after the money there, and realized that I think the top 50 people make $300,000. These are patrol people. Well, their salary is 60 to 80,000. They're making 300,000. Who's giving that to them? Those are bribes, and when you get bribes like that, that's who you are dedicated to, and that's the role of the police, anyways. So they paid off the police, they paid off the newspapers, they paid off the news and the politicians. But that's regular business. How do you overdo that? Well, the union movement, when we were much bigger percentage, right now we're at 10.9%. Well, we're basically 15 million, 0.9. We're actually only 15.4 million workers for union, because there's 500,000 police who say they're in unions, but they're not in unions. So that brings us down to 15.5 million workers. How do we overcome Wall Street? Well, before 1950, before the McCarthy period and Taft-Hartley and stuff, we had what they called communist organizing, which most unions in the world do, but that was kind of taken away from us, where you go in and actually organize the workers. You develop leaders from within. That concept is not here in the United States. You don't develop union leaders from within. And so that's what we have to do. We have to change what we are doing. We have to develop the leaders amongst every sector of the workers, every shift, every nationality. You have to have that base and a core, or you ain't doing nothing. Then you have to go after your allies and supporters. The problem with our allies right now, the union movement is small. We have to expand our allies. Black Lives Matter has to be understood from both sides, that they're allies. The community groups, they're allies. You got to get supporters, and you have to nurture them. There got to be a consciousness between all of them to come together. And that's one thing the Workers' Assembly is trying to do. Then you can go and organize churches and families and community groups. Big thing is we got to organize the unorganized. They're the vast majority of this country today. If we don't organize the unorganized, we're not going to win. The unemployed, all the jobs that are unorganized. There's plenty of ways to go after them. There's this whole campaign about the minimum wage. In Louisiana, that's 50% of the workforce. In every community, it's a large percentage of the workforce. There is issues. Healthcare, obviously, is a huge issue. That you can organize the unorganized. That's what we have to do. I want to bring up a couple of things. One, obviously the tactics are all in the employer's favor. We have to change that. There's some things that we've like. There is I don't know, people are following Julian Assange and Manning about what they're doing, basically making a Dropbox for workers by spying on with whistleblowers what the employers are doing. And not only in this country, but around the world. And obviously, why are they going after them so viciously? It's because they don't want us to know this information. We have a right to know this information. They don't have a right to the internet and all that stuff. They spy on us, Facebook, whatever, they spy on us, and our employers has access to that. We want access to it. So all those people should be out of jail. I want to talk about other things that we have to face. And that's how to move workers throughout this country. Obviously, workers are everybody. As our last speaker was talking about immigration. If you don't move the immigration workers along with everybody else, you're not moving. If you don't work with the Black workers, if you don't organize the unorganized, you're not moving. This has been an artificial divisions amongst us, and that has to stop. We're facing big problems right now, just like our ruling class is facing an economic decline. Who are they going to take that out on? They're going to take it out on us, every worker in this country. And they'll have to have big campaigns to divide and conquer us. Because I don't care what Joe Biden says, you know in your heart, or you know actually that they're after us. They're going to take all these losses that have been sustained by businesses, they're going to take it out on the workers. Also, there's been a big geopolitical decline in the United States. The United States has a hard time defeating small countries now and colonize them. But yet they want to go to war with China and Russia. To do so, they need to smash workers' organizations in this country, just like they did during World War II and the Korean War. We must internationalize our movement here in this country. Like the brother was saying, when we have forums like this, we have to ask the Mexican workers, through the unions or community groups, to come on. The Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, the Cubans, the Filipinos, not in this country, but in their country, so that there starts to be a relationship. Because when the US starts a war of colonialism in their country, we have to emerge together. Because every time there's been a big upsurge in the workers' movement and the US starts a war, that surge gets depleted. We can't allow that to happen, especially at this period of time. So these international links are extremely important. There's, like I said, there's going to be a huge amount of domestic attacks. So there has to be developing consciousness. So like we did at Workers' Assemblies, supported the Amazon unionization, and they should do that. But there's also other struggles of the unorganized. There's going to be huge attacks coming down the pike, plus the international wars. Right now, there's still the struggle on immigration with TPS, DACA, and at the border. These are workers' issues. Those are our issues. That we can't allow our movement not to take these up, along with the Amazon, along with the police brutality, and racism and sexism and xenophobia and homophobia. These issues have to be united. I'll tell you, I went on a delegation with Workers' World to Iraq before the last invasion. And I met with the trade unions in Iraq. And when we called for the meeting, they brought every national leader of Iraq's trade unions into a meeting with me and our delegation. The first thing they said to us was, "Where have you been?" Every union in the country, in the world, has been here. So giving us support, except for one country, and that was the United States. The workers' movement here cannot isolate ourselves. We can't isolate ourselves from each other, but we can't isolate ourselves from workers around the world. We should have communication with the Chinese workers and the Russian workers and in the Mexican workers. There's no reason why we don't have great struggles with the Mexican workers and the Cuban workers. The Cuban workers have put out feelers for relationships with everybody here in the United States. We have to pick this up. So the big thing, all these struggles do, we'll talk about the Pro Act, but there will be a lot of posturing by the ruling class and employers about how nice they intend to be to us. No one believes that. They're going after us, you know. They may play Mutt and Jeff, they may, you know, soft cop, hard cop, but we have to stick together and we have to make a movement. If we want this Pro Act in, we have to go after Joe Biden, we have to go after the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, we have to go after the Wall Street to force that in. And it's not going to be done by a filibuster. It's only going to be done by workers on the street. When the consciousness of the union leaders, who are really misleaders, that they have no idea what to do, when their consciousness says, well, I got to get my ranks out and the communities out to do that, then we'll be moving. But that's right now, that's an objective of the Workers' Assembly, and that's going to be an objective of the workers here in the United States. So thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Oh, Makasi, you're here.
Yeah, and yeah, I appreciate that a lot, Ed. So next, we're bringing up Martha Gravatt. They're a longtime union activist who served on the executive boards of UAW Locals 122 and 869 and Pride at Work, the FL-CIO's LGBTQ plus constituency group. She's a managing editor of Workers' World. Martha, what is the PRO Act and can we win it?
Well, thank you. The PRO Act, PRO stands for Protecting the Right to Organize. And if you're a union member like myself, you probably got a text or an email or both from your union asking you to call your senator and tell them to vote for the PRO Act. If you force yourself to watch Biden's speech last night, he made a brief reference to the right to organize, rights of worker rights. And, oh, you know, we got to pass the PRO Act and I'll sign it. But what is it? To understand it, you have to know a little bit about the history of labor law in this country, which has really not ever been intended to encourage class struggle, unionism, or to encourage union membership or fighting unions that will really challenge the capitalist system of exploitation. But in the 1930s, there were fierce class battles, mass strikes, workers taking over factories, sit-down strikes, solidarity of labor with the struggle of the oppressed. Monica showed a banner for the Scottsboro defendants, and there were workers that were carrying signs for the, supporting this anti-racist struggle. There was a high level of class consciousness. And in 1935, Congress passed the National Labor Relations Act, which is also known as the Wagner Act, after Senator Robert Wagner. And this basically gave workers the right to organize unions, the right to strike. And if workers wanted a union, this law created the National Labor Relations Board, which would go into a factory or restaurant or, any workplace, conduct an election, And if the union won the election, as they were trying to do in Bessemer, then that employer had to recognize the union. It didn't have a choice. And it made certain union busting tactics that are still practiced today illegal, but it didn't have any teeth. There was no penalty when a company broke the law and tried to break a union. But nevertheless, with all its shortcomings, the bosses hated this law and they wanted to see it overturned. And Jones and Laughlin Steele went to court to try to overturn the Wagner Act, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And they couldn't really make a legal argument that, well, workers shouldn't have the right to have unions. If we don't want them, they don't get them. They couldn't really say that. So it was a whole convoluted argument related to interstate commerce and the right of Congress to pass laws and blah, blah, blah. And it really, under other circumstances, the bosses might have won in the Supreme Court. But it was such a period of struggle. It was 1937, where there were over 500 sit-down strikes, which is a strike where workers don't walk out. They stay in and they occupy the workplace. So the Wagner Act was upheld by the Supreme Court by a 5-4 vote. But then in 1947, 10 years later, it's a conservative, it's right after World War II, and there was a massive, the biggest strike wave ever in US labor history. And so they passed this law called the Taft-Hartley Act, which was a union busting act that amended the Wagner Act to take any teeth it might have out and make it very difficult for workers to win strikes and win unions. And it had a lot of provisions. Many people know about right to work. That came out of Taft-Hartley, and states could pass laws where you could not have a closed shop. In other words, your contract could not say everyone here has to join the union, or it couldn't have an agency shop where if you don't join the union, you still have to pay a fee for us representing you and fighting for your wages and benefits. It really was, denying the so-called, the sacred freedom of speech, denying it to workers and their unions. It banned mass picketing. It prohibited secondary strikes and boycotts. So if one company is on strike and the company you work for is buying scab products, you can't go on strike over that. That's considered a secondary strike. Imposed all kinds of limitations. And Taft-Hartley is one of the legal tools that the bosses have used to drive down union membership, which, as Ed said, is around 10.5% of the workforce, or around 15.5 million workers. So what this, excuse me, I should add that even the Wagner Act did not give the right to organize to all workers, and in fact had a racist provision that denied the right to organize to agricultural workers and domestic workers, who are among the most exploited and oppressed workers in the workforce today as then. And also public sector workers were not covered. Also, we'll say that the same Supreme Court that upheld the Wagner Act in 1937, a year later, ruled against labor in the Fansteel decision. Fansteel was a company in Illinois, and there had been a sit down and the company fired the workers. But the workers said, well, the company was violating the law and you trying to break our union illegally. So because they broke the law, we had the right to seize their company. And we agree with that. Workers should have the right to engage in any means of struggle, including factory occupations. But the Supreme Court sided with the company and said that they could fire workers for having a sit-down strike. So what does the Protect the Right to Organize Act do? It overturns some of the really odious provisions of Taft-Hartley. It allows secondary strikes and boycotts, and it undercuts right to work laws. It says that a state cannot make it illegal to have an agency shop, meaning you can't force workers to join the union, but you can make them pay for what your union provides them with. It also bans these awful union busting captive audience meetings where the company makes workers go to meetings on their job and subjects them to all kinds of anti-union propaganda and threats and intimidation. It also bans the hiring of permanent replacements, meaning if you're on strike, the company can't threaten you that, oh, we're going to replace you if you go on strike and you won't have a job to come back to. Now they can't do it. So there's a number of benefits to organized labor in the PRO Act, and the union movement is right to demand that we have these legal protections and we regain back some of what we lost in terms of our rights to organize. And when we organize, our right to fight back. But Biden knows that the Senate doesn't have the 60-member supermajority needed to get this PRO Act passed. So all he really has to do, if he's really for it, is issue an executive order making the PRO Act law. There's all kinds of precedent for presidents issuing broad, sweeping executive orders. And in fact, the organization that we helped start, Support Amazon Workers.org, we now have a petition online, and I urge everyone to sign it to demand that Biden pass the PRO Act. But just as in the past, when pro-union legislation was only passed in the heat of the class struggle, we need to escalate the class struggle. Our rights are under attack. Our wages are falling. Our unions are under attack. Healthcare is not deemed a right. Our health benefits are under attack. Everything that we've won over a century of struggle that we fought for, it's all under siege. They don't want to raise the minimum wage. It's way below a livable wage. And we need to put a fire under the behind of the ruling class again, like we did in the 30s. And when they feel the heat, they will make concessions to us. They've been taking concessions from us since Ronald Reagan broke the Air Traffic Controllers Union in 1981. It's time for us to fight back against this rotten capitalist system, and they will try to put a lid on the struggle. And we will, if we cannot get Biden to do what he says he supports, we're going to push this petition. We're going to try to get thousands and thousands of signatures. But if we elevate the class struggle to a level like we've seen in the past, they're going to have to cave in. They're going to have to give in to us, and we will win this PRO Act and more. because we need more even than what's in the PRO Act. So let's kick some butt. Let's kick some capitalist butt and fight back against the system. Solidarity forever.
Thank you so much, Martha. Next up, we're going to hear from Chris Hollis with the Southern Workers Assembly. Hi, Chris. Thank you so much for being on. My question is, why is organizing the South so critical to the working class movement?
Thank you, Romeo. And Margaret, you did great. I'm following behind some really great speakers with some great experience. I believe, in my personal belief, it's very important to organize the South. We know that the South, as we all are aware of Bessemer, Alabama, those workers were being exploited, working tireless hours. Through my own personal experience, being a blue collar worker and being in these fractions, these labor fractions and these fights against these capitalist organizations, it's very sad, especially during the pandemic. A lot of eyes were open. It's like the sheets were pulled off of the social inequality and the exploitation of all workers. I worked at a company, a former Valley Protein worker, but I am an active organizer for Valley Protein. They are a subchapter now of the UE 150. And ironically, May will be their birthday. We started organizing May 2020 during the pandemic. A lot of issues. This company, I don't know if everyone is aware of rendering, but rendering is a $1 billion enterprise. A lot of people that eat poultry, somebody has to kill it. And where does the spoils go? They go to a company that makes biodiesels, byproducts, proteins for dog foods, and they're just making billions. But who is responsible for the company's profits? We know it's the everyday workers. These workers at this plant, the plant workers work tirelessly, 3 weeks in a row for 12 hours a day. The drivers that haul the renderings from the poultry plants to Valley Protein to cook it up and turn it into a product, they work 70 hours a week, straight time hours. And this has been going on forever and a day. So May, we started, workers were tired. They weren't giving out any kind of PPEs, personal protective equipment, like face masks, no hand sanitization. So we organized. We built a committee. And through my experience, I know through successful organizing and unionizing of workers, you have to have a model. You definitely have to have a model to follow, and a successful one, because you're going to be dealing with people who have been exploited forever. Their voices have been suppressed. It's like nothing will ever change. And so you're not just battling against, the company's anti-union propaganda. You're dealing with workers who are afraid. They're afraid of change that's better for them. In a sense, I look at it, at that particular company, as slaves working on a plantation. They're just working tirelessly. They spend minimum time with their families. So we said enough was enough. So a group of us got together. We actually mapped out the company. We knew workers because of just working day to day with them. So, it was like a family structure, right? You work more time with your work, you spend more time with your co-workers than you do with your own personal family. If you want to just do a rough estimate of your time spent throughout the year. And so that's very important, because you get to deal with the stressors from somebody else that is very familiar with what you're dealing with. So we organized and launched a petition. That petition was only because of a survey that we took amongst ourselves. What's the problem? Do you have an issue with how they're doing business? Do you have an issue with no time off? You work a full year at this company only to receive 2 sick days a year. 2 sick days. There's no calling in without getting reprimanded. So we decided a petition, and that petition made a lot of changes. Females had to use a unisex bathroom. They didn't have their own. The petition changed that. They were able to have their own restrooms. You know, they weren't handing out any kind of PPEs. The petition changed that. They started handing out PPEs. You know, we actually did a meet and confer with the bosses, which was, it blew their minds away because they actually seen a petition with abundance of signatures of workers standing in solidarity, supporting these changes. And the corporate executives refused to accept it. So we certified mailed it to the owner, just so he knew that workers have a voice. And that was very powerful and influential. And granted, this company has 4 locations in the state of North Carolina. We started in Fayetteville. We migrated to Lewiston, North Carolina, to Wadesboro, North Carolina, and we're currently working on Rose Hill, North Carolina. Workers have woken up. We fought this company tooth and nail over the violation of workers' rights. So the takeaways, you know, as far as why unions are so important, because there's protections for the workers, exploitation of these companies, and also fighting for collective bargaining. You know, I've been blessed to have the opportunity to fight in both the private sector and the public sector, which are 2 different fights, you know, but there's strategy and there's models, you know, of success. You know, right now, Virginia Beach, we're making historical movements, you know, so history is being written as we speak. We know May the 1st, the law changed to collective bargaining, you know, so workers are very excited. Again, these workers in this location were facing the same fears, you know, of management. But due to educating these workers on their labor rights, on knowing how to organize, you know, and just giving them that basic information that they need to empower them, that's very important. Because we know not everyone is a leader, but a good leader can have followers, and people will follow his leadership. And so that's what we've been establishing. One of the most recent developments, why unions are so important again, I had the opportunity and the pleasure of representing a worker who was removed from his job based off of a personal issue that he had with the law. Not getting too much into detail, but they took it upon themselves to exploit this worker and suspend him indefinitely until the litigation, until a resolution of his charges was met, right? So the city was going into continuation and continuation. This worker was out of work for 3 months. It affected him financially, economically. He had to move out of his home, move in with his mother. It was just a lot of, you know, when you don't work, you don't have the income, things drastically change in your life. And this individual came to the union and he said, look, this is my situation. I need help. Now, he may not have been too enthusiastic about a union and why we were trying to structure the union in Virginia Beach, but he soon knew how important it was. So I would have the privilege to be assigned to his case. I studied it, put in tireless hours, learning the ins and outs. And this past Tuesday, we went to a hearing, and all I can say, it went beautifully. He was restored back to his job with back pay wages. And what he said to me was very important, and I'll never forget it. He says, Chris, I see the power of a union, and I'm sold out. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to help build this union in Virginia Beach. And that was, you know, that was priceless to me. You know, that was worth more than anything. I actually cried, you know, because we worked together. You know, we went through the whole knit and caboodle of his case, had his supervisors on the stand under oath, you know, asking questions we already knew the answers to. The opening argument, the closing argument was like textbook because we put the work into it to point out disparate treatment, how the city imposed the maximum penalty to him and they did not have to. But he knew that he was being treated wrong, being mistreated. So I've learned that 80% of the time, we listen to these workers and their issues and their problems. And 20% of the time, we can speak to them with solutions. So understanding his situation, it spread like wildfire. We're anticipating, and workers continue to call in, they continue to text, congrats to Mike. He actually started work today, after being out of work close to 3 months. He was very ecstatic, and he's on board. But because of the union, he didn't have to pay for legal counsel, which would have probably charged him between $200 to $600 an hour. This individual was in an economic disparity. His life was affected, and management did not care. They could care less. But standing together in solidarity, his co-workers came in, they were character witnesses, they spoke good on his behalf, his supervisors spoke good on his behalf, and it was so overwhelming. And the argument was justified, where this gentleman is now back to work. So because of the unions, people's lives change, and they change for the betterment, not for the worse. So the fear I feel only comes from workers not being educated, understanding their labor law, their labor rights. Right now in Valley Protein, we have an article that was printed by The Guardian, a newsletter, and it talked about the rural workers fight, paraphrasing, in the rural areas. Because a lot of these companies like Valley Protein, again, they will buy plots of land, in rural areas, to where there's a chicken plant down the street and there's Valley Protein next door to them, right? And that's the only companies that keep the economy going in that small town. So workers spend their lives going back and forth, or maybe even retiring from one of them. So they know that, and the company knows that there's not too many options for these workers. So they exploit them. They work them like slaves, and can care less. But we had a trick for them. We're actually organized really deep in these plants. We've recently had a class action lawsuit worth millions of dollars. I can't give a specific number, but for wage theft, the workers stood up. Now this company is scrambling. They're sending out checks without any kind of receipts on them, telling employees, look, we think we owe you this money from December 2016. This is 2021. Come on now, really? But they cannot get out of it because the workers demand change. They demand this change. We also won a National Labor Relations Act against that company, to where the company had to post the notice, the National Labor Relations Act notice, that they cannot, will not, must not, and shall not intimidate, interfere, coerce, or even ask about workers' union or organizing sympathies. They've been cited with a violation. And I mean, if I was a fly on a wall, I could just imagine what, the language coming out of their mouths. But the workers are fed up, and we're not giving up. Because we know when we fight, we receive change. Change only comes from people like you, who are on this call right now, who are social activists in the labor fraction, in the social fraction. We're out here fighting for change. And we are the ones that make the difference, because we are the leaders we have been waiting for. And we're only here to develop more leaders, learn from each other's experiences, and take this back to our own realities, where we still are engaged in these fights. And the fight will never end, because the workers need unions. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, thanks a lot. These comments, all these speeches were really great. And I just kind of wanted to briefly say that, I think the common thread here, and it might sound so simple, it's not worth saying, but we got to talk to workers, right? Because how do you build worker power? You have to have conversations with workers. How do you build a union? You have to talk to workers. How do you build a workers' assembly? You have to talk to workers. And I think a lot of times those of us who are maybe a little bit more politically advanced, we consider ourselves activists or organizers. we get really wrapped up and we get really busy talking with other people who are just like us. So, on May Day, we're going to have, there's going to be some amazing speeches on May Day, and there's going to be some really powerful talks from some of the best organizers around. But the question about our victory is going to be determined on May 2nd, when we go back to wherever we come from and have a one-on-one conversation with a worker. That's the whole thing. If we don't do it, we don't get a revolution. So I'm really glad that we had these speakers, because they all really explained how much can get done once you start building in that way and talking to workers. I'll hand it over to you, Romeo.
All right. At this time, I would like to encourage all of you to send in your questions for our panelists for our Q&A section at the end. If you're not on Zoom, you can submit these questions through Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And now I want to bring Monica back on to ask her, how is every issue, or I'll wait for Monica to be.
Yeah, I'm trying to, oh, there you go. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
How is every issue, including the ongoing fight against racist police terror, a working class issue?
Okay. Well, fortunately, I had all these other great speakers talk before me about the issue, why every issue is really a political issue. And I just wanted to read a quote from Vladimir Lenin's What is to be Done, a book that was written over 100 years ago, where he said, this is just one sentence, but it's so powerful: without a revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And what he meant by that is, while it's really important for the workers, as we've been talking tonight, the workers to try to, through unions, through other ways of organizing, trying to win back from the bosses, these greedy bosses who steal their labor power to make profits. And so this is why it was so important to build the unions back in 1886 through the 1930s, as Martha talked about, up until now, to win back some of the stolen surplus value in the form of wages that the bosses have stolen from the workers. The workers were fighting for an 8-hour day because their lives were so intolerable, because they were working 10 to 16 hours a day. I mean, the bosses didn't care about, how they were treating the workers. They treated them like they were an appendage, to machinery. And that's how all the bosses think of workers, because all they care about is making profits. So I wanted to raise the example of the laundry workers center, because while it's important to have unions, the Laundry Workers Center is more than just an organization that is organizing migrant workers, which is very, very important, especially in the center of the belly of the beast, which is the United States. But they're also fighting on political issues as well. They're fighting against sexual harassment of women workers who face this day in and day out, a lot of times in silence, against, sexist bosses. And they're fighting against misogyny. They're fighting against ICE, the Immigration Customs Enforcement. In other words, they're fighting against deportations of the very workers they're trying to organize. This is a political issue. This is not just an economic issue. It's also a political issue. And this is why the workers' assemblies are so important too. As Chris and Makasi were talking about, and others, in terms of how do you empower the workers as a class, not just an individual union here or there, or individual worker center, or any other form of organizing workers. How do you help the workers realize that they are a class, a powerful fist that can really defeat the capitalist class. In other words, to overthrow class relations, to overthrow capitalism. And I want to end again with quoting Lucy Parsons, because I want to read a quote, a really incredible quote from her that sort of epitomizes what it means not only to be a militant union organizer, which she was, but she went beyond that. She was an anarchist. She was a revolutionary socialist. She was for getting rid of the system. And she wanted to empower the workers. Here is a woman, just keep this in mind. She came out of slavery. This woman was born into slavery until she was a teenager and became one of the most powerful orators of the 20th century. So I want to end with this quote from her. And she asked a question. Now, what do we mean when we say revolutionary socialist? We mean that the land shall belong to the landless, the tools to the toiler, and the products to the producers. I believe that if every man and every woman, and of course you have to keep in mind this language was over 100 years ago. I believe that if every man and every woman who works or who toils in the mines, mills, the workshops, the fields, the factories, and the farms of our broad America should decide in their minds that they shall have that which of right belongs to them, and that no idler shall live upon their toil, then there is no army that is large enough to overcome you, for you yourselves constitute the army. My conception of the strike of the future is not to strike and go out and starve, but to strike and remain in and take possession of the necessary property of production. Let us sink such differences as nationality, religion, politics, and set our eyes eternally and forever toward the rising star of the industrial republic of labor, remembering that we have left the old behind and have set our faces toward the future. There is no power on earth that can stop men and women who are determined to be free at all hazards. There is no power on earth so great as the power of intellect. It moves the world and it moves the earth. I hope even now to live to see the day when the first dawn of the new era of labor will have arisen, when capitalism will be a thing of the past, and the new industrial republic, the commonwealth of labor, shall be in operation, end quote. I can't say it any better than Lucy Parsons. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. And at this time, I'm going to ask all of our panelists to turn their cameras on. We have time to ask a couple audience questions before we close out. So I'll read them out, and if you feel moved to answer, just take it away. The first question we have sent in is, how do you think a communist revolution might play out in the United States? What do you think needs to happen for a revolution against the capitalist class to be successful? Do you think we need a cultural revolution as well as an economic revolution here in the States?
I'd like to address one point about that, Lenin talked a lot about what kind of factors are necessary for a revolution to be successful. And, he talked about the objective factor and the subjective factor. And what he meant by that was that the objective factor is, well, they're the conditions that workers are facing. So on the downside, it's the exploitation. But on the positive side, an objective factor is the workers being in motion. It doesn't matter, for example, that, or it's not a permanent defeat if the Amazon workers lose their unionization vote, right? The fact that they went out and tried to do it, that's the thing that matters, because they'll fight again and they will win that union. So these are things like an objective factor. The people out in the street for George Floyd, that's another example. The subjective factor in Lenin's view was what are the most advanced revolutionaries doing? How organized are they? How disciplined are they? And that is the thing that in the West, I think, especially in the US, that we really have to build up. The subjective factor, the responsibility of activists and revolutionaries to really be disciplined and, like I said before, get out there and actually talk to workers.
Thank you, Makazi. Does anyone else want to speak to this question before I ask the next one?
I can chime in on it. There's the question of consciousness, and as Makazi and others were saying, getting workers into motion. If you don't get the workers into motion, we ain't going to have nothing. Now, what happens when you get workers into motion? I have two examples. One is our strike at Harvard. We had at Harvard University 750 dining hall workers. So the dishwashers, the servers, the cooks went on strike. It was pretty much a unanimous strike. We went for wages in healthcare. They were going to actually take away our healthcare. It took over 3 weeks on strike, which was very detrimental. We had just gone over 3 months layoff. So people didn't have food, diapers, they were lost their electricity, but they stayed. Nobody crossed the line except very few. We got our wages. We got our benefits. We got our health care back. We even got better than we asked for. But there was some demands that we had put on the table. Transgender rights. We wanted to be on the diversity committee that only management was allowed. And we wanted Columbus Day off our calendar and put Indigenous Peoples Day. And so the union staff and management says, okay, it's all done. We got our stuff. And the workers all said, no, we're not going back until we get those other demands. And we stayed out for another day and a half. And we got those demands to the surprise of the union staff. But 750 workers stood up unanimously and said, yeah, we're not going back. And this is in very bad conditions. The other example I want to use is Wisconsin. Let us not forget Wisconsin. Not that far long ago, when the governor tried to, well, he did, put in a right to work law. And the workers rose up and seized the state house in a unity of unions, women's groups, community groups, Black and Latino groups in united, and they seized the state house for days, for weeks. It was an insurrection. And they lost because of misleadership in the unions. The unions' leadership did not know what to do. The workers knew what to do, but the leadership did not know what to do. We have to train ourselves what to do. The workers are ready. They just have to be in motion.
Thank you so much, Ed.
Can I just say one more?
Yes, of course, Monica.
Yeah. Well, that's a big question. You know, how do we organize a communist revolution, you know, inside the United States? And of course, every revolution has its own process. But one thing you can say about having a revolution in the United States, the productive forces are so right now in terms of the workers taking over in order to make sure to ensure that everybody has what they need to survive, you know, to live. And so the main contradiction is that the means of production are in private hands, and the workers have to organize to take it out of the private hands of the bosses. But the biggest obstacle that we face, or one of the biggest obstacles, is building solidarity, building class solidarity, because that's the last thing that the bosses, the capitalist bosses, want to see. The working class becoming united, not only in the United States, but globally. When you talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been going on for years. It's been going on really since Trayvon Martin was murdered back in 2012. But for the most part, it was mainly Black people, Black forces, transgender forces and other oppressed people, in the streets. And what was missing was the broad class solidarity. That changed with George Floyd. What happened to George Floyd broadened that solidarity. When they started to see young white people in the streets with Black and brown people, the boss, that rattled, the capitalist class. And it had a decisive impact on the verdict that came out last week, against George Floyd, against Chauvin. It had a decisive impact that sustained rebellions in the street of a multinational character. And that's what we have to keep building on. And I'll end with the efforts of the Support Amazon Workers.org. We felt that it was our job not only to support what the Retail Workers Union was trying to do in terms of organizing the Bessemer workers, but building broad solidarity with this effort was very, very important for these workers. And we were able to do that on February 20th and March 20th with 50 or more actions around the country, mainly political activists, showing solidarity with the efforts of the Bessemer workers. And they have never forgotten that. And we're going to continue to build upon those efforts.
Thank you, Monica. That transitions beautifully into our next question, which is, how can we be in solidarity with workers internationally, like Chinese workers? So how can we build those connections?
I'd like to take a stab at that. And hopefully others will follow. Really, the question of international solidarity, especially with International Workers' Day on the horizon, it's one of the most important, decisive questions for the working class movement today. As we said, every issue is a worker's issue, and every worker is part of the class family of workers all over the world. The old union slogan, "An injury to one is an injury to all," more true today than ever before. So when a country is in the crosshairs of the empire, of the US empire, our first duty is to demand, hands off that country, hands off imperialist, hands off China, hands off Syria, hands off Iran, hands off Cuba and Venezuela, and to struggle in this country against all the threats and the lies and the propaganda and the sanctions and sometimes outright war that this powerful country engages in against workers around the world. China is complicated because it still is essentially a socialist country, but it's a mixed economy and there are billionaires, Chinese billionaires and billionaires from imperialist countries that have grown rich exploiting the Chinese workers. So we support all the workers of the world when they challenge exploitation by the bosses, by foreign companies and so forth. And really it's companies like Amazon and Walmart that really profit off the low wages in countries in the global south. So we're in solidarity with the workers, but we're in solidarity with China against imperialism. And we saw with the pandemic, and we've written about it in our newspaper, Workers' World, a lot, that China beat the pandemic because in China, the healthcare needs of the people are more important than the profit drive of pharmaceuticals and the healthcare for profit industry. So so really a world struggle to say healthcare for people, not for profit, is a way of building international working class solidarity. And ultimately, it's a struggle for world socialism, to get rid of capitalism altogether all over the world. That is the greatest solidarity that can be ever created across borders and across oceans. Wow.
Thank you, Martha. Mahoma,
Can
do
I
you
say
want-
something? Yeah, that's like I participate in a different meetings and forums, and a lot of people talk about solidarity. But in reality, if we really want to build solidarity, we should be back to the rank and file model.
Oh, you muted yourself, Mahoma.
Business models don't work. It's hard to say we should be in solidarity with the workers, but you as a union to sign a letter in support, they had to go in an entire bureaucracy process just to sign a letter. You ask the unions to support and make an stoppage or make together a secondary picket, and it's like crazy. We cannot like build real solidarity and bring changes if we don't have the control of the production and the distribution. So the business model unions don't work at all, because basically I have conversations with the workers who basically approach to the worker centers because they have a union, but they don't have even the copy of the contract. They don't know who contact to the union to be represented. And this is like, this business model is very transactional. It's like a pay you dues, we're gonna represent you, but in reality, nothing happened. I don't say all the unions are that, but we need to push, we need to change the model, we need to back to the 30s and the 40s, when basically, like you mentioned, like communists and socialists organizers, they really built a huge movement in that, and we lost that. And it's hard to have or build a solidarity with basically sometimes, or some unions, they invest the money or the dues of the workers to support politicians, democratic parties. That's insane, that's crazy. It's like, or dues go to support politicians, and these politicians, when they are in the chair, they pass laws against workers. That's insane. That's like, if we really want to talk about solidarity, we need to change the entire model of the in the unions and also in everywhere.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to answer that question before I move on to our final one? All right. If not, we want to thank all our speakers so much for this powerful discussion. I've appreciated all of your words greatly. We're going to take this energy into May Day on Saturday. And in closing, I invite you all to answer our final question, which is, what is the way forward for worker organizing?
What's the what?
The way forward. What are the next steps for worker organizing? Don't all go at once.
Chris.
Oh, Chris, go ahead.
Yes, I'll take that one. Again, all of our speakers, very powerful points. I've been educated and enlightened on another level now. So, salutes to everyone. But I think solidarity is a word that has been ringing around throughout this whole, conference, our Zoom. And it's very important. because the workers need support from our community, and our community needs the workers. You know, and coming together and standing in solidarity, I believe that's where we get our most power. You know, I've heard workers say, I'm not into politics, but we all know that politics plays a very big part in everyone's life, right? If we all didn't get out there to vote, would there be a change that's happening now? You know, so it reaches home when we all can just come together and stand and fight on the same issues. Monica made a very good point earlier about the George Floyd movement. I mean, it was very powerful. It was something that everybody can relate and gravitate towards. And we've seen change all the way up through legislation. You know, so I think that term solidarity, let's just keep that on the forefront of our minds, because it's an element, you know, it's a tool that is greatly needed. You know, it causes us to unify, you know, and come together. And as I always use the phrase, the hand, you have 5 fingers. They're not powerful until you put them all together. And you can give the corporate elites a good knockout punch. And that's what we're doing. As we continue to come together and fight, standing on the same battlefront, you know, we're going to be victorious. We are in a lot of our own fights, but as a collective, there is nothing on this planet Earth that can stand up against everyone when we come together. That's the most power we'll ever see. And that's what I'm continuing to fight and pressing forward to as we continue to move forward in the labor fraction. Thank you.
So one of the things we do in Laundry Worker Center is basically build political consciousness, build solidarity, organize, and then take direct actions. I think is in the way how we doing, and yes, I have other people, other organizations, unions do the same in their own way, but yeah, direct action is the key.
Does anyone else have closing remarks? It doesn't have to be a direct response to this question, just anything you'd like to share as we wrap up.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Mahoma and Chris said, is that the relationship with the workers is personal. And if you ever watch huge demonstrations in the past, but also internationally, it's workers out in the street that has made things significant. And when we start organizing the workers, whether undocumented, documented, unorganized, or organized, and we get them out in the street, we change politics. We also change our fate. We also change the fate of the ruling class, and they know that. That's why they're going to come down and with all the repressive right to work laws or whatever they come down with. And it's going to be a tough struggle coming up with the economic decline in the United States and the world. So I just want to reiterate what Chris and Mahoma said about getting deep down into the workers and then joining everybody together in a solidarity movement to do what we want to do. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ed. And thanks to all of our panelists. You know, if you consider yourself a revolutionary socialist, if you consider yourself a communist, and you want to build a revolutionary movement, and you want to get out there and actually talk to workers and make something happen, it's really time to join Workers' World Party. So go to worker.org/join, fill out the form. Someone will be in touch with you, because you know, discussions like these are great, but we have to take action. We have to talk to people, and we actually have to build. So you know, go to worker.org/join.
And you can join us again every Thursday at this time, 5 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern for webinars like this on a huge range of subjects. Until then, we'll see you out in the streets on Saturday, May 1st for International Workers' Day. Stay safe, get involved, and build a workers' world.